The vertebral column of frog. The vertebral column protects the soft and delicate spinal cord. The vertebral column supports, at its interior end, the head, which remains much above the substratum. The transverse process provides surface for the attachment of the muscles, which can bend and straighten the trunk of the body. Atypical vertebra has three main parts. The first one is the centrum. The centrum is a cylindrical mass enclosing the notochord. It is the main body of the vertebra to which the arcs and processes are attached. The neural arc. A dorsal arc of the centrum enclosing the vertebral or neural canal where the spinal cord is found. The processes. Projections from the arcs and centra which provide for increased rigidity of the column. Some prevent excessive torsion of the vertebrae. Some articulate with drills and may also serve for muscle attachment. Three types of atypical vertebra. The first one is the atlas. The atlas is the first vertebra. A vertebra without transverse processes and zygapophysis. However, it is provided with a pair of anterior concavities that articulate with the occipital condyles of the skull. The second one is the sacral vertebra. The sacral vertebra is a vertebra with enlarged transverse processes which are slightly directed posteriorly. The urostyle. The urostyle is a fuscaudal vertebrae of frog. It is a long bone which tapers posteriorly and provided with a median dorsal elevation called keel.
Skull. The skull is an axial endoskeleton found inside the head where it encloses and protects the brain. It is the most complex of all endoskeletal structures, chiefly because of its origin and development. It serves as the skeletal framework of the vertebrate head. The parts of the skull are premaxillae, bones bearing small teeth at the tip of the upper jaw. Maxillae, teeth-bearing bones extending posterolaterally from each premaxilla. Quadratojugals, bones located immediately posterior to the maxillae, can easily be differentiated from maxillae in the absence of teeth. Nasals, triangular-shaped bones found immediately posterior to the premaxillae on the dorsal side. Sphenoethmoid, unpaired, irregularly shaped bone attached to the median posterior end of the nasals. Frontoparietals, bones found at the posterior end of the sphenoethmoid joined by the median dorsal suture extending throughout their entire length. Prootic, found at the base of frontoparietal of each side enclosing the inner ear. Squamosals, hammer-like structures between the prootics and quadratojugals. Orbit, large opening found at the free end of the squamosal which marks the location of the eyeball. Foramen magnum, an opening leading to the cranial cavity found into the cranial cavity found at the posterior end of the skull through which the brain and the spinal cord connect. Exooccipitals, bones surrounding the foramen magnum which bear a pair of rounded elevations called occipital condyles articulating with the concavities of the atlas. Vomers, bones of the skull bearing small teeth called vomerine teeth, found ventral to the nasals and immediately posterior to the premaxillae. However, vomerine teeth may not be seen in some species of frog. Parasphenoid, bone forming the ventral wall of the cranium found immediately posterior to the vomers. Palatines, bones forming the anterior edge of the orbits which extend laterally from the tip of the parasphenoid to the maxillae. Pterygoid, triradiate bones located lateral to the prootics and ventral to the squamosals.
This is the lower jaw of the frog, which comprises of mentomechilion, the shortest and most anterior bone of the lower jaw. Second, dentary. a longer bone of the lower jaw immediately posterior to mentomechilian. Third, angulus perennial. The most posterior bone of the lower jaw, found immediately ventral to the dentary bone, and bears a projection called coronoid process. This is the hyoid apparatus of the frog, which comprises of thyroid process, bony part of the hyoid apparatus providing support to the larynx, which are attached to the median posterior side of the body of the hyoid. Second, body of the hyoid. Main part of the hyoid apparatus, which anterior projecting process called alary process, and a pair of anterior and posterior cornu. Alary process. Projections from the anterior lateral side of the body of the hyoid. Anterior cornu. Long slender cartilage which are posterior laterally and arising from the anterior border of the body of the hyoid medial to the alary process. The last one is posterior cornu. Short pointed cartilage lateral to the thyroid processes found at the posterior border of the body of the hyoid.
This is the pelvic girdle. Pelvic girdle is an appendicular skeleton which serves to brace the posterior appendages. It differs from pectoral girdle in the absence of dermal components. The parts of pelvic girdle are ilium, pubis, ischium, and acetabulum. Ilium, a long bone passing forward to the vertebrae, particularly to the transverse processes of the sacral vertebra. Pubis, a small ventral triangular shaped bone. The two sides of the pubis are united in the mid-ventral line by way of cartilage. Such union is termed pubic symphysis. Ischium, the lowermost of the three sections of the pelvic girdle, posterior to the pubis. Like the pubis, the paired ischia are fused by the ischiac symphysis. Acetabulum, a cup-shaped depression which receives the head of the femur. Typically, all three bones of the pelvic girdle meet at the acetabulum and contribute to the depression.
Bones of the forelimb. The anterior appendages, called forelimbs, articulate with the pectoral girdle, which however is rarely directly jointed to the vertebral column. The parts of the forelimb are humerus, regio-ulna, carpals, metacarpals, and phalanges. Humerus, a proximal segment of the forelimb supporting the upper arm. It has a rounded head which fits into the glenoid fossa of the pectoral girdle. Regio-ulna, median segment of the forelimb supporting the forearm. It is the fused bone of the radius and ulna. Carpals, wrist bones made up of 6 small bones arranged in 2 rows and found immediately posterior to the regio-ulna. Metacarpals, slender bones supporting the palm found immediately posterior to the carpals. Phalanges, shorter bones supporting the fingers found immediately posterior to the metacarpals. Bones of the hind limb. The posterior appendages, called hind limbs, similarly articulate with the pelvic girdle and transmit their support to this girdle. The parts of the hind limb are femur, tibiofibula, tarsals, metatarsals, and phalanges. Femur, a proximal segment of the hind limb supporting the thigh. It has a rounded head which fits into the acetabulum of the pelvic girdle. Tibiofibula, median segment of the hind limb supporting the shank formed by the fusion of the inner tibia and outer fibula bones. Tarsals, bones of the ankle made up of 2 rows of proximal and distal bones. Metatarsals, slender bones supporting the soles of the feet found immediately posterior to the tarsals. Phalanges, small bones of the toes posterior to the metatarsals.